They ruled a global empire where the sun never truly set. They were Europe's most powerful royal family, yet their faces grew increasingly strange, their lives often tragic. Their palaces were filled with both masterpieces of art and grisly saintly remains. These are the Spanish Habsburgs, a dynasty that shaped centuries, and their story is stranger than you think. Number 10. The War of the Spanish Succession. The grand halls of the Alcazar in Madrid hummed with a different kind of tension. It was the turn of the 18th century, and a specter loomed larger than any courtier or general. The death of King Charles II. His reign had been a long, slow fading, a testament to the heavy burden of his ancestry. He was the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, a line that had held the throne for nearly 2 centuries, and his impending passing promised not peace, but a storm. Across Europe, chroniclers noted the king's increasingly frail health, his difficulty speaking, his body racked by illness from childhood. Courtiers whispered about his struggles with basic functions, his reliance on his servants, his almost childlike demeanor, even as a king. The problem was simple. Charles II had no heir. His 2 marriages had produced no children, a common and tragic theme within the later Spanish Habsburg line. This lack of an heir set off a frantic, desperate scramble among the major European powers. The vast Spanish Empire, stretching from the Americas to the Philippines, was a prize too enormous to ignore. It commanded immense wealth in silver and gold strategic ports and an unparalleled network of trade routes. Its lands in Europe included the wealthy Netherlands, parts of Italy, and the Iberian Peninsula itself. No single power wanted a rival to absorb such a colossal inheritance. 2 main contenders stood ready to claim the empty throne, both linked by intricate webs of royal marriage to the dying king. One was Philip, Duke of Anjou, a grandson of King Louis XIV of France. His claim came through his grandmother, Maria Theresa, who was Charles II's half-sister. The other was Archduke Charles of Austria, a younger son of Emperor Leopold, the first of the Holy Roman Empire. His claim stemmed from a direct male line of the wider Habsburg family, albeit the Austrian branch. The choice between a French Bourbon and an Austrian Habsburg felt like a choice between 2 opposing futures for Europe's power balance. In the final months of Charles II's life, the pressure on him was immense. Advisors, diplomats, and even religious figures pressed him to name a successor. The Spanish court was a hotbed of intrigue, with factions supporting either the French or the Austrian candidate. Nobles argued, ministers debated, and the dying king himself wrestled with the decision that would define his legacy and perhaps prevent widespread war. Records from the era describe the king as suffering greatly, his mind clouded at times, yet aware of the momentous decision before him. He received counsel from every angle, his bedchamber becoming a stage for a quiet, desperate play of power. On his deathbed, in a moment of clarity or perhaps desperation, Charles II made his will known. He chose Philip, Duke of Anjou, the French candidate. This decision was not made lightly. Many believed he feared the partition of the Spanish Empire, a deal that European powers had been discussing behind Spain's back. He believed that only a strong French connection could keep the empire intact. When the news reached the courts of Europe, it was met with a mix of relief in Paris and outrage in Vienna and London. Louis XIV famously declared, "There are no longer any Pyrenees, signifying the close bond between France and Spain under Bourbon rule." But the other European powers, especially Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, and the Austrian Habsburgs, saw this as an unacceptable expansion of French power. A combined France and Spain, with their vast colonial resources and military strength, threatened to dominate the continent. They formed the Grand Alliance, vowing to prevent the union of the French and Spanish crowns and to place Archduke Charles on the Spanish throne. Instead, this set the stage for a conflict that would rage across Europe and its colonial outposts for over a decade. The war began not with a single declaration, but with a series of military movements and diplomatic maneuvers. Armies marched across the fields of Flanders, through the valleys of the Rhine and across the plains of Italy. Naval battles erupted in the Mediterranean and Atlantic, impacting global trade routes. Commanders like the Duke of Marlborough for the Grand Alliance and Marshal Villars for France led their forces in epic clashes. The Battle of Blenheim in 1704 was a decisive victory for the Anglo-Austrian forces, severely weakening French dominance. The Siege of Gibraltar in 1704 to 1705 saw British forces capture the strategic rock, a possession they would hold for centuries. Spain itself became a battlefield with different regions, supporting different claimants. Catalonia, Aragon, and Valencia, with their distinct historical rights and grievances against the centralizing policies of the Castilian monarchy, largely supported the Austrian Archduke Charles. They hoped for a restoration of their traditional fueros, or privileges. Castile, on the other hand, tended to support Philip V, seeing him as the legitimate heir chosen by Charles II and a continuation of a strong, unified Spain. This division led to a civil war within Spain itself, further complicating the international conflict. The sieges were brutal, the battles costly in lives and resources. Cities like Barcelona endured long, devastating blockades. Soldiers from different nations fought side by side, and sometimes against each other, in a complex tapestry of alliances and rivalry. The war was not just fought on land and sea, but also in the courts of Europe, where diplomats tirelessly negotiated and schemed. The economic drain of the war was immense for all parties, leading to widespread hardship and discontent among the populations. Over time, the tide of war shifted. The Grand Alliance achieved significant victories, pushing French forces back. Archduke Charles even briefly occupied Madrid. However, the unexpected death of Emperor Joseph I of the Holy Roman Empire in 1711 drastically altered the situation. Archduke Charles now became Emperor Charles VI, uniting the Austrian Habsburg lands with the prospect of inheriting the Spanish Empire. Suddenly, the very fear that had ignited the war, the dominance of a single power, was reversed. Great Britain and the Dutch Republic no longer wanted to replace one potential superpower with another. They feared a restored vast Habsburg Empire as much as they feared a dominant Bourbon one. This new Guillain reality paved the way for peace negotiations. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 and subsequent treaties at Rastatt and Baden in 1714 finally brought the long, devastating war to an end. The treaties recognized Philip V as the King of Spain, but with a crucial condition: the crowns of France and Spain could never be united. Spain lost many of its European territories, including the Spanish Netherlands, Naples, Milan, and Sardinia, which were ceded to the Austrian, Habsburgs, or other European powers. Great Britain gained Gibraltar and Minorca, securing vital naval bases, and also secured trade rights in the Spanish Americas. The war cost millions of lives and reshaped the map of Europe. It brought an end to the direct Spanish Habsburg line, replacing it with the Bourbon dynasty. But it also ensured that Spain, though diminished, remained a significant player on the world stage, its vast colonial empire largely intact, though now under a new royal house. The conflict highlighted the intricate, often deadly dance of power that defined European politics for centuries. Number 9. The global reach of their empire. The year 1580 found Philip II, King of Spain, facing an extraordinary moment. With the death of the last direct claimant, Philip asserted his right to the throne of Portugal. After a brief military campaign, Portugal and its vast colonial empire were absorbed into the Spanish crown. This event was not merely a territorial gain in Europe, it was an unprecedented expansion of a global dominion. Philip II now governed not only Spain, Naples, Sicily, the Netherlands, and the sprawling territories in the Americas, but also Brazil, the Portuguese trading posts in Africa, India, and the highly lucrative Spice Islands. Chroniclers of the time struggled to find words grand enough to describe this new entity. They began to speak of an empire on which the sun never sets. Imagine a vast web spun across every meridian of the globe. From the silver mines of Potosi, high in the Andes, where indigenous laborers toiled under brutal conditions, to the bustling port of Seville, where the precious metal was unloaded, the scale was immense. The silver from Potosi, discovered in the mid-16th century, was so abundant it became the financial backbone of the entire Spanish Empire. It fueled Spain's wars, paid its armies, and financed its lavish court. Ships, called galleons laden with this wealth, sailed across the Pacific from Acapulco in New Spain, modern-day Mexico, to Manila in the Philippines, a journey of thousands of miles, often lasting months, braving storms and disease. This Manila galleon trade was the first truly global trade route, connecting the Americas, Asia, and Europe in a continuous economic circuit. The journey of the silver coin from Potosi could take it across the Pacific to Manila, where it would be exchanged for silk, porcelain, and spices from China in the east. These goods would then sail back across the Pacific to Acapulco, transported overland to Veracruz, and then loaded onto the Spanish treasure fleets bound for Seville. From Seville, the Asian goods would be distributed across Europe, while the silver flowed out to pay for Spanish debts, foreign goods, and military campaigns. This flow of wealth created both immense prosperity and significant economic challenges, including inflation. Across Europe, the empire's reach extended into unexpected corners. In North America, Spanish conquistadors and missionaries pushed north from Mexico, establishing settlements in Florida, New Mexico, and California. St. Augustine, founded in 1565, remains the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the United States. Franciscan friars established missions converting indigenous populations and introducing European agricultural methods and livestock. Explorers like Francisco Vázquez de Coronado searched for legendary cities of gold across the southwestern deserts, their journeys recorded in detailed logs that depicted vast unexplored territories. Across the Atlantic, the Caribbean islands served as crucial strategic outposts. Havana, San Juan, and Santo Domingo became fortified cities, hubs for the treasure fleets and centers of colonial administration. Sugarcane plantations worked by enslaved African people generated immense profits that flowed back to Spain. The brutal realities of the encomienda system, which granted Spanish settlers control over indigenous labor and tribute, and the transatlantic slave trade were integral to the functioning of this vast economic machinery. Reports from various colonial administrators and missionaries detailed the challenges of governing such diverse and distant lands, often grappling with rebellions, disease, and the sheer logistical complexity of communication. In South America, beyond the Silver Mountains of Peru, the Spanish established viceroyalties in New Granada, modern-day Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and the Rio de la Plata, modern-day Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia. Here, gold, emeralds, and agricultural products, like coca leaves and cacao, flowed from the interior to the coastal ports. Jesuit missions in Paraguay, known as Reducutsnaing people, where indigenous Guarani people lived and worked under the guidance of the friars, often protecting them from the brutality of slave traders. The global reach was not just about resources. It was also about spreading faith. The Spanish Habsburgs saw themselves as the champions of Catholicism. Missionaries, primarily Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits, traveled with the conquistadors, establishing churches and converting indigenous populations throughout the Americas and Asia. The influence of the Catholic Church was profound, shaping colonial societies, education, and culture. Records from the period often describe the meticulous efforts to translate Christian doctrines into local languages and the establishment of schools and universities in cities like Mexico City and Lima, long before similar institutions existed in parts of Europe. Even in Europe, the Spanish Habsburg Empire was a patchwork of diverse kingdoms and territories. The Netherlands, with its wealthy trading cities and rebellious Protestant population, was a constant source of military and financial drain. The struggle to maintain control there led to a long and costly war stretching for decades and impacting the Spanish economy. In Italy, the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily and the Duchy of Milan were vital strategic points, providing access to Mediterranean trade routes and serving as bases for Spanish armies operating in Europe. These territories contributed taxes and soldiers to the imperial cause, but also presented challenges of governance and local resistance. The Spanish Habsburgs Empire was a complex, interconnected system, held together by royal decrees, military might, and the vast flow of wealth. It was a testament to the ambitions of the monarchs, the daring of explorers, and the suffering of millions. Its sheer scale and the intricate network of trade routes, administrative centers, and military outposts made it a unique phenomenon in world history. The sun truly did not set on the lands controlled by the Spanish Habsburgs, a testament to their unparalleled reach and influence across the globe for nearly 2 centuries. Number 8. The grand stifling court etiquette. The royal palace in Madrid. The Alcazar was not just a residence. It was a stage where the most elaborate and rigid etiquette in Europe played out daily. Under the Spanish Habsburgs, particularly from the reign of Philip II onwards, a ceremonial code of conduct developed that permeated every aspect of court life, from the king's waking moments to his meals and public appearances. This was not merely about pomp. It was a deliberate construction of power, a visual representation of the monarch's divine right and absolute authority. Chroniclers of the period detailed the minute regulations that governed behavior, dress, and even speech within the royal presence. The day of the king, Philip II, for instance, began with a highly ritualized awakening. Only a select few high-ranking nobles and chamberlains were permitted to enter his bedchamber. The process of dressing the monarch was a solemn ceremony, each garment presented and donned with a prescribed motion. Every movement was slow, deliberate, designed to emphasize the sacredness of the king's person. Even the act of providing water for the king's hands, or fetching his slippers, followed a specific protocol, roles assigned to specific individuals, based on their noble rank. A single misstep, a gesture out of place, could be seen as a grave offense against decorum. Meals were equally formalized. The king typically ate alone or with a very small, carefully chosen group of close family members. But even then, the atmosphere was one of quiet solemnity. Servants moved with hushed reverence, serving dishes brought from the royal kitchens under strict supervision. The food itself was prepared with immense care, but the act of eating was not a relaxed affair. The king sat on a raised dais, further emphasizing his elevated status, and those few permitted to join him were acutely aware of the honor and the need to maintain an air of respect. Descriptions from foreign ambassadors often noted the stark contrast between the boisterous courts of other European powers and the almost monastic silence of the Spanish royal dining hall. Public audiences were spectacles of controlled power. When a foreign ambassador or a high-ranking noble was granted an audience, they approached the king with a series of bows and formal greetings, carefully prescribed by court protocol. Speaking to the king directly was rare. Often, communication went through a series of intermediaries, each relaying the message with precise wording. Even members of the royal family adhered to these rigid rules. The infantas, the king's daughters, and the infantes, his sons, were brought up with an understanding of their position and the strictures of court life. From their earliest days, their education included not just academic subjects, but also the intricate dance of royal etiquette. The concept of the auto de fe became a chilling example of this grand spectacle, intertwined with religious zeal. These were public ceremonies of the Spanish Inquisition, where sentences for heresy were read out and punishments meted out, including public penance, imprisonment, or in the most severe cases, execution by burning While a terrifying instrument of religious control, the auto de fe was also a meticulously organized public event, attended by the royal family, nobles, and vast crowds of common people. It was a macabre form of entertainment and a powerful demonstration of the church's and the crown's authority. The king and queen would often sit in a specially constructed loge, observing the proceedings. The condemned, dressed in distinctive garments, sanbenitos, were paraded through the streets, accompanied by solemn processions. The entire event, from the morning procession to the reading of sentences and the final executions, could last for hours. The strict order, the solemnity, and the public nature of these events reinforced the power of the monarchy and the church, demonstrating the dire consequences of dissent. It was a carefully orchestrated display of religious orthodoxy and social control designed to instill fear and enforce conformity. The court attire itself was a significant part of the grand etiquette. Spanish fashion was characterized by its rigidity, dark colors, and elaborate ruffs, gorgeras, and farthingales. Men wore severe black doublets and breeches, often padded to give a stiff, unyielding silhouette. Women's dresses were equally rigid, with wide, bell-shaped skirts supported by hoops and tight bodices that constrained the figure. The use of black, adopted by Philip II as a sign of piety and seriousness, dominated the court. This somber, formal clothing reinforced the solemnity and gravity of the court, making movements stiff and deliberate, complementing the controlled behavior. Every piece of clothing, every jewel, every accessory spoke of rank and status. Even leisure activities were subject to a degree of formality. Royal hunts, though seemingly less constrained, still involved a retinue of attendants and a specific protocol. Court entertainment, such as plays or musical performances, was staged with a clear hierarchy of seating and participation. The royal family maintained a distance from the general court, their interactions carefully managed. This constant separation and formality created an atmosphere where the king and queen were almost deified figures, distant and awe-inspiring rather than approachable individuals. The system of court etiquette under the Spanish Habsburgs was a double-edged sword. It provided stability and a clear structure for governance and social hierarchy. It projected an image of immense power and dignity to foreign courts. However, it also stifled spontaneity, created an intensely formal and sometimes stifling atmosphere, and limited direct interaction between the monarch and his subjects, even those within the highest echelons of the nobility. For the kings themselves, especially those like Philip II, who embraced this formality, it meant a life of relentless public performance, rarely escaping the confines of their carefully constructed royal persona. The grandeur was undeniable, but so too was the rigid control. Number 7. The gold and silver from the New World. The discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus in 1492 set in motion a chain of events that would fundamentally transform the Spanish Empire and the global economy. For the Spanish Habsburgs, the lands across the Atlantic were not just new territories to claim. They were a source of unimaginable wealth, primarily in the form of gold and, later, vast quantities of silver. This flow of precious metals reshaped Spain's power in Europe, fueled its wars, and inadvertently contributed to its long-term economic struggles. Early reports from the Caribbean islands describe the initial finds of gold, often taken from rivers, and the personal adornments of indigenous peoples. The conquest of the Aztec Empire by Hernán Cortés in the 1520s, and the Inca Empire by Francisco Pizarro in the 1530 dramatically increased the initial flow of gold. These advanced civilizations possessed sophisticated gold and silver craftsmanship, and their accumulated wealth was systematically plundered by the Spanish conquistadors. Temples were stripped of their gilded ornaments and royal treasuries emptied. Accounts from the soldiers describe the awe and greed inspired by the sheer quantity of precious metals, often melted down into ingots for easier transport. Back to Spain, the arrival of these first shipments of gold in Seville caused widespread excitement and a sense of boundless opportunity. However, it was the discovery of immense silver deposits that truly transformed the economic landscape. The most significant of these was the mountain of Potosi. In present day, Bolivia, discovered in 1545, this was not just a mine. It was a silver mountain so rich that it became a legend in its own time. The sheer volume of silver extracted from Potosi and other mines like Zacatecas in New Spain, Mexico, dwarfed all previous finds. Indigenous labor, often coerced through systems like the mita, was used extensively and brutally to extract the ore. Later enslaved African people were also brought in to work the mines, enduring horrific conditions and short, painful lives. The silver was transported from the mines to the port cities. From Potosi, it traveled by llama caravan to the Pacific coast, then by ship to Panama overland across the isthmus, and finally by ship again to Havana, Cuba. From Zacatecas it went to Veracruz, Mexico. These 2 points, Havana and Veracruz, became the critical assembly points for the famous Spanish treasure fleets. Twice a year, heavily armed convoys of galleons, known as the flota and the galeones, would gather, load their precious cargo, and sail for Spain. This system was designed to protect the wealth from pirates, privateers, and rival European powers. Though raids and shipwrecks still occurred, the journeys were long, perilous, and vital to the Spanish crown's finances. The arrival of the treasure fleets in Seville was a major event. The city became the gateway for American wealth into Europe. The Casa de Contratación, or House of Trade, regulated all commerce with the Americas, ensuring that the crown received its royal fifth, or quinto real, a 20% tax on all extracted minerals. This royal fifth, combined with other taxes and revenues from colonial administration, provided the Spanish Habsburg monarchs with an unprecedented income. This wealth allowed them to finance massive standing armies, build impressive navies, and engage in numerous wars across Europe against Protestant reformers, the Ottoman Empire, and rival Catholic powers. Philip II in particular used this American silver to fund his ambitious foreign policy. His construction projects like El Escorial, and his relentless defense of Catholicism. The influx of so much silver and gold had profound and complex effects on Spain and Europe. One of the most immediate and significant consequences was widespread inflation, often called the price revolution. As more and more silver entered circulation, the value of money decreased, and prices for goods and services rose dramatically across Europe. While initially benefiting those who received the silver, first like the Spanish crown, it eroded the purchasing power of wages and caused hardship for many common people. This inflation also made Spanish goods more expensive relative to those produced in other European countries, hurting Spain's nascent industries and making it more reliant on imports. Despite the immense wealth flowing in, the Spanish crown often found itself in perpetual debt. The costs of maintaining such a vast empire, fighting continuous wars, and supporting a large bureaucracy often outstripped the incoming revenues. The reliance on American silver meant that when shipments were delayed or reduced, the crown faced severe financial crises, leading to repeated bankruptcies. Philip II declared bankruptcy multiple times, as did his successors. This dependence on external wealth also meant that Spain neglected to develop a strong domestic manufacturing base or a robust internal economy. Much of the American silver flowed out of Spain almost as quickly as it arrived, used to pay for foreign goods, foreign mercenaries, and foreign loans. The American wealth also attracted fierce competition. English, French, and Dutch privateers, like Francis Drake, preyed on Spanish treasure fleets, aiming to seize the precious cargo. Naval skirmishes and full-scale wars often revolved around access to American trade routes and control of strategic ports. The struggle for colonial dominance in the Caribbean and the Americas became a central feature of European international relations. For centuries, the gold and silver from the New World transformed Spain into the dominant European power, for a time allowing the Spanish Habsburgs to pursue their imperial ambitions on an unprecedented scale. However, it also set the stage for economic challenges, including inflation and dependence on foreign credit that would plague Spain long after the silver mines began to wane. The legacy of this vast flow of wealth continues to be debated by historians, a testament to its profound and enduring impact on global history. Number 6. The fate of their children. The Spanish Habsburgs were a family defined by both immense power and profound tragedy, a narrative often played out in the lives, or lack thereof, of their children. While the dynasty boasted an unbroken line of succession for nearly 2 centuries, the individual experiences of their royal offspring were frequently marked by high infant mortality, physical frailties, and mental instability, particularly in the later generation. Royal records meticulously documented births, baptisms, and deaths, revealing a grim pattern of fragile health within the royal nurseries. The constant need for alliances meant a continuous cycle of intermarriage within the European royal families, often among close cousins or even uncles and nieces, to maintain power and consolidate territories. For the Spanish Habsburgs, this practice of endogamy became particularly pronounced. The family's vast empire meant that marriage into other powerful houses was a strategic imperative, but their determination to keep the family power and wealth within their own lineage led to repeated unions with other Habsburg branches, creating a dangerously constricted gene pool. He had 4 wives, each marriage strategically chosen for political reasons. His first wife, Maria Manuela of Portugal, gave birth to their only son, Don Carlos, but died shortly after childbirth. Don Carlos's life was a descent into personal torment and public scandal. Described by chroniclers as physically deformed, with a hunchback and uneven shoulders, his mental state was even more troubling. He exhibited violent outbursts, unpredictable behavior, and a deep antipathy towards his father. Stories circulated about his cruelty to animals, his attempts to harm those around him, and his erratic political ambitions, including rumored plots against his father's life. Philip II, a man known for his stern piety and control, eventually had his son arrested and imprisoned. Don Carlos died in confinement at the age of 23, under mysterious circumstances, fueling rumors of patricide that persist to this day. His death was a severe blow to the succession, leaving Philip without a clear heir for a period. Philip II's subsequent marriages produced more children, but the pattern of fragility continued. His third wife, Elizabeth of Valois, bore him several daughters, but no sons who survived infancy. His fourth and final wife, his niece, Anna of Austria, finally provided him with a male heir who survived childhood. The future Philip III, but even this triumph was bittersweet. Anna bore 5 children, but only Philip III lived to adulthood. The others perished in early childhood, victims of the prevalent diseases of the time, perhaps exacerbated by the underlying genetic foulbodies within the family. The reign of Philip III saw further examples of high infant mortality. His wife, Margaret of Austria, bore him 8 children, but only 5 survived to adulthood. One of his daughters, the Infanta Anna Mauritia, married King Louis XIII of France and became the mother. But her journey to motherhood was also fraught with multiple miscarriages and infant deaths before a healthy heir arrived. The most poignant and devastating example of the dynasty's genetic decline was King Charles II, the last Spanish Habsburg. He was born in 1661, the product of generations of close cousin marriages. His parents were Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, who were uncle and niece. His grandmother, on his father's side, Mariana's mother, was also a Habsburg. This intense inbreeding left him with severe physical and mental disabilities from birth. Chroniclers described him as sickly and frail, unable to speak properly until he was 4 years old, and unable to walk until he was 8. His famous Habsburg jaw was so pronounced that his upper and lower teeth could not meet, making chewing and speaking extremely difficult. Charles II's health was a constant concern throughout his life. He suffered from frequent illnesses, fits, and what appeared to be cognitive impairments. He was often described as slow, childlike, and heavily reliant on his courtiers and regents, particularly his mother, Mariana. Despite 2 marriages, he produced no children, a failure that became the central crisis of his reign and ultimately led to the War of the Spanish Succession. The Spanish court, desperate for an heir, resorted to various attempts to cure his infertility and improve his health, including exorcisms, as they believed his ailments were due to witchcraft or demonic possession. These efforts, of course, were futile. The women of the Spanish Habsburg family, the Infantas, also often faced tragic fates. Many were married off young for political alliances, sent to foreign courts where they sometimes struggled to adapt or bear healthy children. Their lives, though seemingly privileged, were constrained by dynastic imperatives. Some, like Isabella, Clara, Eugenia, a daughter of Philip II, played significant political roles as regents, but others found themselves isolated or unable to fulfill their primary duty of producing heirs. The high rates of infant mortality and the prevalence of physical and mental infirmities among the Spanish Habsburg children serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of their relentless pursuit of dynastic purity. The desire to keep power within the family line through repeated endogamous marriages ultimately contributed to the weakening and eventual extinction of their direct male line. Their family tree, a complex web of intertwined branches, became a visual representation of their genetic vulnerability, culminating in the sickly figure of Charles II, the last and most tragic of the Spanish Habsburg. Number 5. Their devotion to relics and the macabre. The Spanish Habsburg monarchs were known for their fervent, almost obsessive Catholic piety, a devotion that extended to an intense reverence for religious relics and a comfort with the macabre. This was not merely a superficial display. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of their spiritual lives, shaping their personal practices, their patronage of the Church, and even the design of their most significant architectural projects. Royal inventories and church records provide detailed accounts of the vast collections of holy objects accumulated by the monarchs, often acquired at great expense. Philip II, often called the Prudent, epitomized this aspect of Spanish Habsburg religiosity. His personal collection of relics was legendary, perhaps the largest and most venerated in Europe. He genuinely believed that possessing these sacred objects provided divine protection, spiritual comfort, and a direct link to the saints themselves. His most monumental project, the monastery palace of San Lorenzo, built as a palace monastery, basilica, and royal mausoleum, was designed to house his vast collection of relics. The basilica within El Escorial contained a dedicated section known as the relicario, or reliquary. It was not merely a display case. It was an intricately designed space, filled with hundreds of ornate reliquaries, each holding a fragment of a saint's body, a piece of clothing, or an object touched by a holy figure. Chroniclers of the period describe the meticulous detail with which these objects were identified, catalogued, and housed. Philip II himself would spend hours in contemplation before these relics, seeking intercession and divine guidance. He believed that the power of these saints, channeled through their earthly remains, could aid him in his wars against Protestantism and the Ottoman Empire. The variety of relics was astonishing. There were fragments of the true cross thorns from Christ's crown, bones of apostles, and pieces of garments from the Virgin Mary. The collection included the remains of St. Lawrence, to whom the monastery was dedicated, and countless other saints. Each reliquary was a work of art in itself, crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones, reflecting the immense value placed on its contents. The air in the relicario would have been heavy with incense, the atmosphere one of hushed awe and deep reverence. This reverence for relics extended to a fascination with death and the physical remains of the deceased, particularly within the royal family itself. The Spanish Habsburgs placed immense importance on elaborate funeral rituals and the solemn preservation of their royal dead. The Pantheon of Kings at El Escorial, a circular crypt built directly beneath the high altar of the basilica, was designed as the final resting place for the Spanish monarchs. The journey to this mausoleum was a grand ritualized procession. When a king or queen died, their body would undergo a detailed embalming process, meticulously recorded by the royal physicians. After the initial burial, which might be temporary, the body would eventually be transferred to El Escorial. The transfer itself was a solemn affair, often involving multiple stages and temporary reburials in intermediate chapels within the complex, sometimes for years until the body was sufficiently reduced or dried to fit into the small, elegant marble sarcophagi within the Pantheon. This process, often involving air exposure and natural decay in specific chambers, might seem macabre by modern standards, but it was considered a necessary step in the dignified and sacred preservation of the royal remains. The goal was to ensure the body could rest perfectly within its permanent marble tomb. The royal crypt itself was a dark, solemn chamber, lit by flickering lamps, designed to inspire reflection on mortality and the transience of earthly power. The sarcophagi, arranged in tiers, contained the remains of kings and queens, a silent testament to the dynasty's lineage. The proximity of the royal dead to the high altar symbolized their eternal connection to God and the Church. Every aspect of the burial ritual, from the initial preparation to the final interment, was carefully choreographed to emphasize the sacred nature of kingship and the hope for eternal salvation. This comfort with the physical aspects of death and decay was also reflected in their religious art. Spanish Baroque painting and sculpture often depicted Christ's suffering with intense realism, portraying bleeding wounds and agonizing expressions. The devotion to the Dolorosa, the grieving Virgin Mary, was widespread, often portrayed with tears and sorrowful countenances. These images were not meant to be disturbing, but to inspire empathy and a deeper understanding of religious sacrifice. The Habsburg monarchs also often kept skulls or other memento mori in their private chapels or studies as a constant reminder of their own mortality and the need for spiritual preparation. These objects served as a stark contrast to the opulence of court life, encouraging introspection and piety. For them, death was not something to be feared or hidden away, but a central part of the human experience and a doorway to the divine. This profound blend of spiritual zeal, relic veneration, and acceptance of the macabre characterized the Spanish Habsburgs' approach to faith. It was a piety deeply rooted in the Counter-Reformation, a period when the Catholic Church sought to reaffirm its doctrines and practices in response to the Protestant challenge. For the Spanish kings, possessing relics and orchestrating solemn rituals was a tangible expression of their unwavering commitment to the Catholic faith and their belief in its power to shape both their earthly and eternal destinies. Number 4, their artistic legacy and court painters. The Spanish Habsburgs were not only rulers of a vast empire, but also some of history's most significant patrons of the arts. Their courts, particularly under Philip IV, were centers of artistic innovation and creativity, attracting and supporting some of the greatest painters of their era. These monarchs understood that art was more than just decoration. It was a powerful tool for propaganda, a symbol of majesty, a reflection of piety, and a means of preserving their image and legacy for future generations. The royal collections, meticulously catalogued by court officials, grew to include thousands of masterpieces, forming the core of what would become the Prado Museum in Madrid. The most celebrated of the Spanish court painters was Diego Velázquez. His career spanned decades, serving King Philip IV with unwavering dedication from 1623 until his death in 1660. Velázquez was more than just a portraitist. He was a close confidant, an advisor, and ultimately a knight. His position at court gave him unprecedented access to the royal family and the inner workings of the monarchy, allowing him to create an unparalleled visual record of the Spanish Habsburg world. His portraits are not merely likenesses, they are profound psychological studies, capturing the character and subtle emotions of his subjects. Velázquez painted numerous portraits of Philip IV throughout his life, showing the king's transformation from a vigorous young monarch to an aging, burdened ruler. He captured the king's melancholic temperament, his intellectual curiosity, and his sense of duty. Velázquez also painted the Queen Elizabeth of France, and later Mariana of Austria, and their children, including the future Charles II. These portraits provide a rare glimpse into the lives of the royal children, from their solemn childhoods to their roles as future rulers. His famous painting, Las Meninas, the Maids of Honor, is a masterpiece of complexity, depicting the Infanta Margaret Teresa, surrounded by her attendants, while Velázquez himself stands at an easel, painting with the king and queen reflected in a mirror in the background. It is a work that explores the nature of representation, reality, and the artist's place within the court. Beyond the royal family, Velázquez painted various court figures, dwarfs, and jesters, who were part of the royal household, and even religious subjects. His ability to capture light texture and the nuances of human emotion was revolutionary. His use of loose, visible brushstrokes, a technique that would influence future generations of artists, gave his paintings a vibrant, lifelike quality. He transformed the genre of royal portraiture, elevating it from mere depiction to a profound artistic statement. Before Velázquez, other significant artists contributed to the Spanish Habsburg collection. El Greco, though not a court painter in the same direct sense, was a favorite of Philip II and created powerful religious works that embodied the fervent piety of the era. His elongated figures, dramatic lighting, and vibrant colors imbued his paintings with intense spiritual emotion, perfectly suiting the Counter-Reformation spirit prevalent in Spain. Philip II famously commissioned paintings from Titian, the Venetian master, whose vibrant colors and mythological subjects resonated with the king's aesthetic sensibilities. Even as he was deeply religious, Titian's portraits of Charles V and Philip II cemented their image as powerful, commanding figures. The Spanish Habsburgs' patronage extended beyond painting to architecture, sculpture, and decorative arts. The building of El Escorial, under Philip II, was a monumental undertaking, blending palace, monastery, and mausoleum into a single, awe-inspiring structure. It symbolized the king's absolute power and unwavering faith. Sculptors created intricate altarpieces, religious statues, and tombs, often in wood, richly painted and gilded, to adorn churches and royal chapels. Tapestries, furniture, and jewelry were also commissioned, reflecting the royal family's taste for luxury and refinement. The royal collections were not just for display. They were actively car-rooted and admired. Inventories indicate the meticulous tracking of each artwork, its location within the various royal palaces, and its value. The kings and queens were not merely passive recipients of art. They were knowledgeable collectors, often providing specific instructions to their artists and engaging in direct correspondence with them. Philip IV in particular was a keen connoisseur, regularly visiting Velázquez's studio and taking a personal interest in his works. The artistic legacy of the Spanish Habsburgs is vast and enduring. Their patronage shaped the direction of European art, providing opportunities for some of the most talented artists of the 17th century. The works they commissioned and collected not only glorified their dynasty, but also created a rich visual tapestry of their court, their beliefs, and their world. Today, the masterpieces of Velázquez, El Greco, and others, housed primarily in the Prado Museum, stand as a testament to the Spanish Habsburgs' profound impact on the history of art. These paintings tell stories of power, piety, and the human condition, offering a window into the lives of a dynasty that ruled an empire and left an indelible mark on culture. Number 3. The Black Legend and Their Brutality. The vast global empire of the Spanish Habsburgs, while a source of immense power and wealth, was also intertwined with a history of profound brutality and widespread human suffering. This darker aspect of their reign became known as the Black Legend, a narrative propagated by their European rivals, particularly Protestant powers, that depicted Spain as uniquely cruel, fanatical, and oppressive. While this narrative was often exaggerated for political purposes, it drew from real events, the harsh realities of the Spanish Inquisition, and the violent conquest and exploitation of the Americas. Records from the period, including detailed accounts from missionaries and colonial administrators, provide a chilling glimpse into these practices. The Spanish Inquisition, formally established in the late 15th century and reaching its height under the Habsburgs, was a powerful and terrifying institution designed to enforce Catholic orthodoxy. Its primary targets were initially conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, and moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity, suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. Later, it expanded to suppress Protestantism and any form of religious dissent. The Inquisition operated independently of the crown in many respects, yet the Spanish Habsburg monarchs fully supported its activities, viewing it as essential for maintaining religious and social unity within their realms. Suspects were often arrested in secret, without knowing the charges against them, and held in solitary confinement for extended periods. Torture was routinely employed to extract confessions, including methods like the strappado, the rack, and the water cure. These techniques were designed to inflict excruciating pain without necessarily causing permanent physical damage. Though many victims suffered lasting injuries or died, the detailed manuals of the Inquisition, outlining permissible interrogation methods, reveal a chilling bureaucratic precision behind the brutality. Those found guilty faced a range of punishments, from public humiliation and penance to imprisonment, confiscation of property, and in the most severe cases, execution by burning at the stake. These executions were often carried out during public ceremonies, known as auto de fe, attended by large crowds, including members of the royal family. These spectacles were meant to be deterrents, grim warnings against heresy. The sheer number of trials and convictions documented in the Inquisition's own meticulous records illustrates the pervasive fear and control it exerted over Spanish society. While the Inquisition's actions were horrific, it is important to note that similar forms of religious persecution and torture were practiced by other European powers during this period, though perhaps not with the same centralized, bureaucratic. The conquest of the Americas by the Spanish was another significant source of the Black Legend. The arrival of Europeans led to a demographic catastrophe for indigenous populations, primarily due to Old World diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles, against which Native Americans had no immunity. However, the violence and exploitation inflicted by the conquistadors and later colonial administrators also played a devastating role. Accounts from individuals like Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar who arrived in the Caribbean in the early 16th century, provide harrowing descriptions of the atrocities committed against indigenous peoples. Las Casas, a tireless advocate for Native American rights, documented the massacres, mutilations, and enslavement of indigenous populations by the Spanish. His seminal work, A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, published in 1552, detailed the brutal methods used to conquer and control, the forced labor in mines and on plantations, and the wholesale destruction of indigenous societies. He described Spanish soldiers using indigenous people as hunting dogs, or inflicting summary executions for minor infractions, or forcing them into labor that quickly led to their deaths. Las Casas's writings, though sometimes criticized for exaggeration, were immensely influential, translated into multiple languages and widely used by Spain's enemies to condemn its actions. The encomienda system, which granted Spanish settlers control over indigenous labor and tribute, became a legal framework for exploitation. Indigenous communities were forced to provide labor and goods to their encomenderos, often under conditions akin to slavery. While the Spanish crown eventually attempted to reform these systems and protect indigenous rights with laws like the New Laws of 1542, these reforms were often difficult to enforce across the vast distances of the empire, and frequently met with resistance from colonial settlers who benefited from the exploitations from colonial settlers who benefited from the exploitations from colonial settlers. The search for gold and silver led to the forced labor of millions in the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas. The Maida system, adopted from Inca practices but intensified by the Spanish, required indigenous communities to provide a quota of laborers for the mines, leading to high mortality rates due to harsh conditions, accidents, and disease. Descriptions from the time highlight the dangers of working underground, the heavy burdens carried, and the unsanitary living conditions at the mining sites. The wealth extracted from these mines came at an immense human cost. The Spanish Habsburgs themselves, while often portrayed as pious and just rulers, benefited directly from this system of exploitation. The royal fifths of all mineral wealth flowed directly into the royal treasury, funding their wars and maintaining their court. While some monarchs, like Isabella I and Philip II, did issue decrees aimed at protecting indigenous populations, these decrees were often undermined by the realities of colonial power and the immense distances involved. The Black Legend thus emerged from a complex interplay of real historical brutalities and the strategic political rhetoric of Spain's rivals. While it oversimplified and at times demonized Spain, it highlighted the immense human cost of empire and the severe methods employed by the Spanish Habsburgs to maintain their religious uniformity and their vast global dominion. The legacy of these actions continues to be debated and understood in modern historical discourse. Number 2, Philip II and El Escorial. Nestled in the foothills of the Sierra de Guadarrama Mountains, some 50 kilometers northwest of Madrid, stands a colossal granite structure that defies easy categorization. It is the monastery palace of San Lorenzo de El Escorial, conceived, commissioned, and meticulously overseen by King Philip II of Spain. Begun in 1563 and completed in 1584, this single building served as a royal palace, a monastery, a basilica, a royal mausoleum, a library, and an art gallery. It was not merely a building. It was a physical embodiment of Philip II's austere piety, his vast power, his intellectual curiosity, and his profound sense of duty. Chroniclers and architects of the time noted the king's direct involvement in every detail, from the overall design to the specific materials used. The inspiration for El Escorial was multifaceted. Philip II had vowed to build a monastery in honor of St. Lawrence, whose feast day, August 10th, coincided with the Spanish victory over the French at the Battle of St. Quentin in 1557. The grid-like plan of the building, often said to resemble a grill, is a reference to the gridiron on which St. Lawrence was martyred. Beyond this vow, Philip sought a permanent royal residence, a place for solemn contemplation and a dignified burial site for his father Charles V, and himself, establishing a royal pantheon for the dynasty. He wanted a place that would reflect his unwavering commitment to the Catholic faith and the ideals of the Counter-Reformation. The architecture itself is strikingly austere and monumental, a departure from the more decorative styles prevalent elsewhere in Europe at the time. Philip chose Juan Bautista de Toledo as the initial architect, a student of Michelangelo who brought classical rigor to the design. After Toledo's death, Juan de Herrera took over, refining the style which became known as Herrerian. The building is characterized by its massive gray granite blocks, its unadorned facades, and its symmetrical rectangular layout. Its sheer size is overwhelming, with 16 courtyards, 2,673 windows, 1,200 doors, and 88 fountains. The exterior projects a sense of immense solidity and permanence, reflecting the king's steadfast character. Inside, El Escorial was designed to cater to the diverse functions it encompassed. The monastery section housed a community of Hieronymite monks who followed a strict contemplative life. Their cells and common areas were simple, reflecting their vows of poverty. Adjacent to the monastery was the royal palace, Philip II's personal residence. Unlike the grand sprawling palaces of other European monarchs, Philip's apartments in El Escorial were remarkably modest. His personal quarters were small and sparsely furnished, reflecting his ascetic tendencies. He famously had a window in his study that looked directly into the basilica's high altar, allowing him to attend Mass from his desk even when confined by illness. This direct visual connection underscored his personal devotion and the integration of his spiritual and temporal roles. The basilica, consecrated in 1586, is the spiritual heart of El Escorial. Its grand cruciform design and imposing dome reflect the architectural principles of the Renaissance, yet its interior is less ornate than many other European churches, aligning with Philip's preference for solemnity over excessive decoration. The high altar is adorned with artworks by renowned Italian masters like Federico Ducari and Pellegrino Tibaldi, reflecting Philip's international taste in art. Beneath the basilica lies the Pantheon of Kings, a stunning circular crypt completed after Philip's death, designed to hold the remains of the Spanish monarchs. The idea of a unified royal mausoleum, where future generations of kings would rest, was a powerful statement of dynastic continuity. El Escorial was also a major center of learning and knowledge. Philip II accumulated a vast library, one of the largest in Europe at the time, containing tens of thousands of volumes. This collection included not only religious texts, but also scientific treatises, historical chronicles, and works of literature from across the globe. Philip himself was a keen collector of maps, scientific instruments, and natural specimens. The library's beautiful frescoed ceiling and elaborate shelves were designed to inspire contemplation and intellectual pursuit. Scholars and translators worked within its walls, translating important texts and contributing to the intellectual life of the court. The building served as Philip II's primary residence for the latter half of his reign. From its austere rooms, he governed his vast global empire, receiving dispatches from the Americas, the Netherlands, and Italy. He worked tirelessly, often for 10 to 12 hours a day, poring over documents, issuing decrees, and making decisions that affected millions. His routine was one of meticulous detail and relentless dedication. He was involved in the minutiae of governance, down to the smallest administrative details, embodying the ideal of the paper king who ruled from his study. El Escorial was more than just a functional complex. It was a symbol. It represented the power of the Spanish monarchy, the strength of the Catholic Church, and the personal piety of Philip II. It was a place where temporal power and spiritual devotion converged, where the king could both govern his empire and seek communion with God. Its enduring presence stands as a monument to one of Europe's most powerful and complex rulers, a silent witness to a reign that shaped the course of history for centuries. Number 1. The Habsburg jaw and inbreeding. The most visually striking and enduring legacy of the Spanish Habsburgs, perhaps even more so than their vast empire or their grand palaces, was a distinctive facial deformity that became known as the Habsburg jaw. This prominent lower jaw, often accompanied by a protruding lower lip and a large nose, was not merely a family resemblance. It was a clear physical manifestation of generations of relentless inbreeding, a practice driven by a desperate desire to maintain power and consolidate territories within a single powerful lineage. Royal portraits from various periods offer undeniable evidence of this recurring physical trait. Growing more pronounced with each successive generation, the practice of royal intermarriage was common across Europe to forge alliances and secure peace. However, the Habsburgs took this to an extreme, particularly the Spanish branch. Their family tree resembled a tangled web rather than a branching tree with numerous marriages between first cousins, uncles, and nieces. And even closer relatives, Philip II, for example, married his niece Anna of Austria. Their son, Philip III married his first cousin Margaret of Austria. Philip III's son, Philip IV, married his first cousin Elizabeth of France, and after her death, his niece Mariana of Austria. This last union between Philip IV and Mariana resulted in the birth of Charles II, the final Spanish Habsburg king, whose physical deformities and frail health became the most dramatic illustration. The Habsburg jaw, or mandibular prognathism, was present in varying degrees throughout the dynasty. Early portraits of figures like Philip I, founder of the Spanish Habsburg line, show hints of the trait. As the generations progressed and the intermarriage intensified, the feature became more pronounced. Portraits of Charles V, while majestic, also show a noticeable prognathism. By the time of Philip IV, the jaw was clearly visible in his portraits, contributing to a somewhat melancholic expression. However, it was Charles II whose face most dramatically displayed the effects of centuries of inbreeding. Chroniclers described him as El Hechicado, the bewitched, due to his numerous physical and mental ailments, and his distinctive jaw was a prominent feature. His lower jaw protruded so far that his upper and lower teeth did not meet, making it extremely difficult for him to chew his food properly. Contemporary accounts noted his struggles with articulation. His speech often slurred or difficult to understand due to the malformation of his mouth. He drooled frequently, and his tongue was said to be so large that it almost filled his mouth. These descriptions, combined with his portraits, paint a vivid picture of a monarch burdened by his genetic inheritance. Beyond the jaw, Charles II exhibited a host of other physical problems. He was often described as frail and sickly from birth, suffering from numerous illnesses, fits, and developmental delays. He could barely walk until he was 8 years old and often relied on support. His overall health was perpetually fragile, and he often appeared weak and physically stunted compared to his peers. These physical frailties were compounded by apparent cognitive impairments. He was described as intellectually slow and dependent on others, unable to effectively govern his vast empire without the constant guidance of regents and advisors. The inbreeding did not only affect the physical appearance of the Habsburgs, it also led to a significant decline in their reproductive fitness and overall health. The rates of infant mortality within the Spanish Habsburg family were exceptionally high. Many of the children born to these close unions either did not survive infancy or died in early childhood. Miscarriages and stillbirths were also common. This constant struggle to produce viable heirs placed immense pressure on the dynasty. The deaths of royal children were meticulously recorded in court documents, pelting a tragic pattern of loss. The scientific understanding of genetics was centuries away. The Habsburgs themselves and their contemporaries did not understand the biological reasons for their recurring physical traits or their children's fragility. Instead, they often attributed health problems and the lack of heirs to divine displeasure, witchcraft, or other supernatural causes. Records show the desperate attempts to cure Charles II, including exorcisms, as they believed his ailments might be caused by demonic possession. These efforts, of course, were futile against a deeply rooted genetic condition. The motivation behind this sustained pattern of endogamy was simple: power. By marrying within the family, the Habsburgs sought to keep their vast territorial possessions, Spain, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and the sprawling American Empire, united under a single family. They aimed to prevent the fragmentation of their lands and to maintain their dominant position in European politics. Each marriage was a strategic decision, a calculated move to reinforce their dynastic claims and secure their influence. However, this strategy, while seemingly successful in the short term for consolidating power, ultimately led to the genetic decay and eventual extinction of the direct Spanish Habsburg male line with the death of Charles II. The Habsburg jaw stands as a poignant historical marker, a visible testament to the profound and unintended consequences of a royal dynasty's relentless pursuit of power and purity of bloodline. It is a striking reminder that even the most powerful families are subject to the immutable laws of biology, and that sometimes the very strategies designed to preserve a lineage can inadvertently lead to its demise.